Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025, and today we are going to be taking a look at the 2025 Virginia gubernatorial election between Winston Sears and Abigail Spanberger, an election that will inevitably end up with Virginia's first woman governor in the state's history. Now, this race is notable for more than just that reason alone. It also stands to be one of the first real tests for the Republican Party as they currently hold the incumbent governorship in this state. Virginia, as a bit of a weird state, only allows one-term governors, meaning that the incumbent governor, Glenn Youngkin, you might remember his name from 2021 when I was covering that race, but he's not running for re-election simply because he cannot run for re-election. But the 2025 race is going to be quite interesting as to major contenders on both sides, neither of which received a primary opponent, have now fast-forwarded themselves right into a general election season. A general election season that is inevitably benefiting the Democratic Party given the historical context of this race and the unpopularity of Donald Trump. And I wanted to talk to the extent at which Democrats are largely on track to win this governor election. I would put money on it today if I was willing. I'm not willing because I don't like to bet on elections. But looking at the 2025 race, if I was to call it today, and I think this will be my understanding of the race between now and November, barring any type of massive change in opinion on the president, and it likely won't be a positive massive change, but barring that exception, the Virginia governor's race is largely on lock for the Democratic Party. Now, to give you a bit of historical context about Virginia, just as a state, it is a state that has not voted for the Republican Party since the 2004 presidential election, and in 2024, it wasn't particularly close. Kamala Harris defeated Donald Trump in the state by roughly 6 percentage points, and that means that it puts this state outside of the lean margin of error, or the lean characterization that keeps it between 1 to 5 points. In 2020, it went to Joe Biden by a margin of roughly 10.1%, and in 2016, it went to Hillary Clinton by a margin of roughly 5 points. Now, looking at Virginia in the 2024 election and beyond, we have to understand that the circumstances of it are very different than the 2021 race, which the polls had predicted accurately that Glenn Youngkin would win by roughly 1.7%. He ended up winning by roughly 1.9%. The Virginia governor's race was a good indicator that President Biden's approval rating, which had been falling at the time, really did matter to voting electorates, where we saw that around the time of this election, Joe Biden was unpopular by roughly 8 points more negative than positive nationwide, meaning there's about an 8-point difference. 51% of the nation disapproved of the job that Joe Biden was doing. Just 43% of the nation approved of the job that Joe Biden was doing. This came after the Afghanistan withdrawal and a huge national attention focus on the state of Virginia and critical race theory. It also came following Terry McAuliffe having a pretty bad debate moment on the stage where he pretty much said that, parents, in so many words, this is the way it was phrased by the GOP, so many words that Republicans were able to frame it this way, that parents did not have a right to dictate what was taught in or outside of schools. And so it was really interesting to see, that Virginia governor's race, which largely was quite positive for Democrats for an extended period of time, but really coinciding with that decrease in approval on Biden, we really started to see Terry McAuliffe's numbers go down and down and down until that final 2 weeks where all of a sudden Glenn Youngkin was leading in the polls, final week actually, and ended up being quite correct. It was that surge of enthusiasm, surge of energy towards Glenn Youngkin that took a state that Biden won by 10 points and turned it into a state that Democrats lost to Glenn Youngkin by roughly 2, so a 12-point swing. But I remember the last time that Virginia had a governor's race when Donald Trump was president, and that was in 2017, when Ed Gillespie, the Trump-endorsed Republican nominee for governor, lost to Ralph Northam by roughly 9 points across the state, 8.9%. I'd round up and say 9. I think that's a fair characterization. This was a first big test for the GOP, and they failed. It was an early indicator that 2018 would go very well for the Democratic Party, that they would win numerous House races, they would flip numerous governorships, that they would hold on to a number of Senate races that would otherwise be more favorable to the Republican Party, states like West Virginia and Montana and Ohio that Democrats held on to in 2018. And you can see that this Virginia governor's race, again, a 9-point margin was a big change from what it had been in 2013. Though Democrats had held on to it under Obama, they only won the race by just 2 percentage points, and it was largely attributed to the fact that there was an independent or libertarian in the race that peeled a lot of the votes away from the Republican Party. But this race actually was expected to be a lot closer. Northam only led by 3 points, and the polls showed at a high point Quinnipiac University. They don't do polls anymore, I believe, or them or Monmouth. One of them announced recently they wouldn't be doing any polls. But the point is, they said Northam would win by 9. ended up winning by 9. That was roughly on track. Everyone else, on average, said he would win by roughly 3.3%. It was expected to be a far closer race than what it actually was. And so it is really interesting, when you take a look at Virginia and its electoral history, but a lot of it can explain exactly why Democrats are so confident about 2025 and why, arguably, they should be. Abigail Spanberger is a tried and tested congresswoman, someone who had been able to do so well in the state of Virginia. Now, Winsome Sears, I saw the duality argument that, yes, Winsome Sears had won her election in 2021, but she would not have gotten that race had it not been for somebody like Glenn Youngkin being at the top of the ticket, had the national environment not been conducive enough for a Republican victory. Because what you had too was that an attorney general going for a third term also lost his election, but there was no heavy focus on the lieutenant governor's race or the attorney general's race. Winsome Sears was pulled across the finish line. A great example, and I don't mean to equate the two Republicans, but a great example of similar situations where people can be pulled over the finish line by circumstances of an election come down to the state of North Carolina, neighboring to the state of Virginia. But I bring it up because in 2020, they held a governor's election as well as a lieutenant governor's election. Now, if you remember the governor's election in the state of North Carolina, you might remember that Roy Cooper won that race. And that was pretty good, I would say, for Democrats. They were able to win by roughly 5 points, but Roy Cooper was popular. In every single down ballot race, we saw that the results roughly indicated that of the presidential election, including the lieutenant governor's race in this state, where none other than Mark Robinson won his race for lieutenant governor as a Republican, who, although he had a number of scandals to his name and nothing to the severity of that of 2024, but a number of scandals to his name, who was dragged across the finish line not because he was electable and not because he was likable, but simply because he had an R by his name on the ballot that the majority of the voters in North Carolina at the time were backing Donald Trump for president. And so what that meant was that in 2024, he made this pitch and argument, I'm so electable. Well, clearly not. Then all these scandals broke out. Nobody paid attention to the lieutenant governor's race, but now people are paying attention to Winsome Sears, who might have gotten by in 2021 largely because there was this huge Republican surge in the state, but will not get by in 2025. And I'm not confident that she will perform well either, and neither does the data suggest that she will perform that well. The most recent poll comes from a Republican internal. Signal, they do these sets of polls all across the country, but in Virginia, what do they tell us? That Abigail Spanberger is on track to win by 6. Now, keep in mind that poll came at the end of February. To give you an idea of where we were at the end of February, the overall net approval for Donald Trump was still in the positive nationwide. Now, Virginia, as a state that voted for Harris by 6 points compared to the 2-point win nationally, is a state that is roughly 8 points to the left of the nation. If Donald Trump is approved of by roughly 1 point, we'd argue that Spanberger should be winning by roughly 7. The poll suggests that she's winning by 6. Not too far off. But can you imagine what the data might suggest today, considering that Trump isn't approved of nationally positively, but rather down 5 points, which would contend that Virginia would also be shifting left. Virginia has this immense opportunity for Democrats to push back, especially as a state that is so close to all these DOGE cuts, all these federal layoffs, as a state that holds a lot of the D.C. metro area workers, people that work in and outside the federal government, whether that's the Department of Education, the Department of State, whether that's in the, nonpartisan offices that have seen themselves laid off because Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency has come in and deemed that their jobs are not necessary. These are the states that are feeling the most, Maryland and Virginia. And guess what? Virginia is a swing state. And Winsome Sears was just caught on tape talking about how she doesn't understand why voters care about the layoffs, saying that, have they never been laid off before? I mean, it's something that really does speak to what the Democratic Party is going to label as an out-of-touch Republican Party. And Winsome Sears, who has been in the governor's office in the sense that she is the lieutenant governor, has been seen by many voters as not doing enough for the voters in Virginia, enough for those constituents who are losing their jobs in this state. If there was to be a perfect state for Democrats to have a combination of factors lean in their direction, you would look no further than Virginia. Maryland comes in at a close second. But this is a great state for Democrats to turn out the vote and to drive home that there is an opposition here to Donald Trump's leadership. They displayed it in 2017. The Republicans displayed it in 2021. And Democrats are going to do the same thing in 2025. I imagine that Trump's approval rating will be roughly where Biden's was in November of 2021, in November of 2025. That Trump will be down roughly double digits, and that the Democratic Party will coast to victory in Virginia, picking up state, delegation races in the House of Delegates, picking up potentially state Senate seats, expanding where they are in the state Senate right now. Democrats have a unique opportunity to really do well in Virginia, and chances are they will. All signs right now indicate that Democrats and Abigail Spanberger will do very well in 2025. That they'll win back the lieutenant governor's office, they'll win back the attorney general's race, they'll win back the governorship at the top, taking it from Republican control. And that will be a major step for the Democratic Party. And it will be a very notable one at that. So closely watch Virginia. Democrats right now very much set up for a layup type of victory. I mean, it's going to be very easy to see how they win this race. And if they do not, that will be a failure on the side of the Democratic Party, a very big one at that. But chances are they're not going to lose this race. Spanberger is a strong candidate. Winsome Sears is not. And looking at the Virginia governor's election, looking at the data we've been presented with, and looking at the context and the broader circumstance that surrounds this governor's race, Democrats have this nearly on lock. And so I wouldn't be shocked if they win it by similar margins to that of 2017, or even further than 8 to 9 points because of this level of discontent, and especially given that Virginia is one of the few states in the nation that is directly affected by many of the decisions by the federal government. And it would be the first place for Democrats to look to directly push back against Donald Trump, and chances are they will. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2025 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.